All right, man, peace. So, brothers, I received an email from a certain cat a while ago pertaining to this topic. And ironically enough, just as I'm making this video, supposedly the news around the campfire is that Joe Budden and this female have quote unquote broken up. The reason why it's ironic is because the topic of this video is the assertion made by Miss Cyn Santana, the, I guess, on again, off again fiance of Joe Budden, who's been in the rap game now for about 20 years or so. Relatively famous for a while in the early 2000s, kind of had a comeback when he aligned himself with Eminem. Either way, just to get back to the point, Cyn Santana, who happens to be so-called Dominican, asserted that in her view, so-called black men treat non-black women better than they treat black women. That's an assertion that she made, and there's a bevy of reasons why she made that statement in my view. One of them being the assumption by non-black people in general, but particularly non-black women, especially if they happen to have a fetish for black men, that the so-called black man is just going to be so thankful that a non-black woman finds them attractive. And that also falls in line or correlates with the notion that the so-called black man is a servant or a slave. In all reality, there's also a disparity or distinction that has to be made between the concept of color and culture. Because if we're just going to go or abide by the quote-unquote color coding racial designations used in this society, Cyn Santana will be classified as a quote-unquote black woman herself. So really the statement that she's making is meant to highlight the difference in culture. She, I believe, assesses the so-called black man and black woman as coming from a quote-unquote culture here in America that is toxically feminine. It is quote-unquote matriarchal. That is why you see so many quote-unquote black American women talking about black matriarchy and how the women are the head. I believe that she has deduced that many black men are flabbergasted and exasperated by the family conventions of the American woman, not just the American black woman, but the American woman in general. And they're seeking a reprieve by looking towards women who come from other areas. Once again, this is not so much a color thing, more than it is a culture thing. But because Miss Cyn Santana does not understand what the connection is between culture and race, she made a statement in a very clunky way. In all reality, she's someone who is infatuated with the so-called black man. And she's trying to project that infatuation on black men, when in all reality, it's her who probably treats black men better than she treats the men of maybe her race or men of other races that she's dealt with. Do I believe that so-called black men treat non-black women better than they treat black women? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, the black man is the biggest simp on the planet Earth. And one of the main contentions in the so-called black community are these dudes who want to talk about how the black woman is God. Okay? Not even a goddess. Like back in the day, I say this all the time. Back in like the late 80s, early 90s, that's when the so-called black simp movement really got going. And you had many black simps who were talking about how the black woman is a prophetess and a queen and so on and so forth. Then it became she's a goddess. Now she's God. So there's nowhere else really to go for the black simp movement. But when it comes to the females of the other races, because the so-called black man tends to have a lot of options, especially when he's relatively affluent or successful in life, you're going to see that he's going to dabble with the women of the other races. And at the end of the day, all these women are Babylonian in Western society. And the Western society or Western social mores are spreading all across the earth. So there's not really that much of a difference between whether the so-called black man is with a quote-unquote black woman or woman of another race. They all follow under the vibration of the mother of harlots, that being the mother goddess, Isis or Kali or whatever you want to call that entity that so many of these females out here are getting their energy from, are getting their verve from, their approach to life from. That mentality of I can fuck all the men I want, I can screw over everyone that I want, I can do what I want, and I can worship myself. That's part and parcel of the super liberal feminist movement, and that really transcends race and color. But when it comes to the so-called black community in America, we see the most extreme manifestation of that dynamic with our people. Because once again, the so-called black man does not know his history. He does not know where he comes from. He does not know his actual culture. So now he has to, or he feels like he has to defer to the so-called black female, at least in his formative years. And by the time he figures things out, he's normally in his mid to late 30s, unfortunately for him. But just getting back to the bone of contention from this person, Cyn Santana, she's looking at the black man as someone who is prone, in a prone position, meaning he's susceptible, he's vulnerable, and she can try to project a lot of her fantasies on him. And I've mentioned this in other videos. What you'll notice about people of the other races when they find the so-called black male or so-called black female physically attractive is that they don't just want to have sex with one black person. Anytime and every time they see a so-called black person of the opposite gender that they find attractive, they're going to try to have sex with them. It's like a drug addiction. Black penis, black vagina can have people strung out worse than crack. Remember Leonardo DiCaprio's character in the film Django. He mentioned that. He was like, oh, you got that black fever? Once that black fever got you, you got. Oh, man. DiCaprio should have gotten an Oscar for that shit. He did a great job. He was the most charismatic slave-owning bastard I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, let's get back to the topic here. Miss Cyn Santana and her statement, her allegation that so-called black men treat non-black women better. So let's see what gets stated here. So at the very top it says, Cyn Santana clarifies old remark about black men and Hispanic women. My young ass worded something poorly. No, I won't say that you worded it poorly. I think that you thought poorly. Your words are just a personification of your thoughts. You felt like because you're infatuated with and strongly attracted to so-called black men that you could say whatever the hell you want to say, because let's understand something. The way that the so-called black man is denigrated when it comes to public projection, it's almost like a stock that gets talked down. The value gets talked down, even though the product is of high value. So the so-called black man gets talked down and talked down and talked down, and his marketability is purposefully curtailed because, once again, he's viewed as a threat. The so-called black man is viewed as a threat. You'll oftentimes find that women of the other races, they'll tell you that they were told by their parents not to date a so-called black man. And it's not just because of the actions of the so-called black man, which, I mean, let's be for real. Many times brothers are dysfunctional, and it's not all their fault. It's because of what they're not taught. It's also because those people of these other races, they want to protect their bloodline. They want to protect their seed line and their lineage. So you can't blame them too much. They also, in the same breath or in the same vein, understand that if the so-called black man is given an equal opportunity, for the most part, he's going to outshine his competition. So that's the reason why they have to talk down on the so-called black man. Now look at Joe Budden here and his lady, Cyn Santana. They both could pass for so-called black. They both could pass for so-called Dominican. Why is that? Because those terms are not really racial. Those terms are artificial designations. So just to get back to the original point, that's how you know that Cyn Santana made a statement that was cultural, but she did not quite understand it as cultural. What she's really saying is that she believed that she comes from an environment that respects men more than the American culture does, or the black American culture does. So now, according to this article, it states, during the holiday season, Cyn Santana and Joe Budden announced they were engaged. Now the love and hip-hop star is now receiving some backlash for comments she made during a 2016 interview on Angela Yee's Lip Service podcast. She stated that she preferred dating black men and suggested it's because black men treat Spanish women better than black women. Let me say this once again. There are a lot of so-called Hispanic women that prefer to date quote-unquote black men. There are some Hispanic men who prefer to date so-called black women. There are some people of other races who prefer to date Caucasian or who prefer to date Asian or what have you. It's normally based on a preference for phenotype or the physical traits more than it is how someone is quote-unquote treated. Maybe Cyn Santana was treated poorly by the men of her quote-unquote race or culture because they saw that she was full of shit. Who knows? Maybe certain black men are a little bit slower on the uptake and figuring out what a female is actually about, and that she's someone of a low caliber because, once again, a lot of cats come from black matriarchal environments. They associate an acerbic or toxic personality or way of expressing themselves with black women because that's what they've been subjected to throughout their childhood, and they're hoping that a woman of another race is not going to express herself in the same way. What a lot of cats eventually find is that, for the most part in Western society, all these women express themselves in similar ways. The black female can be a bit more extreme, but why is that? It's because she has the least amount of trust in the men of her own race because, once again, because the so-called black man is not putting the Most High first, he's now been relegated to, at the very best, on an equal level with his own woman. And the man is not supposed to be on an equal level with his woman. He's supposed to be the head of the woman. But since you have embraced carnal knowledge as opposed to celestial knowledge, so-called black man, the black woman does not respect you or regard you like she's supposed to. Once we start to think and operate with our top head as opposed to just our bottom head, watch how these females have to fall in line. And please don't get it twisted. There's nothing wrong with some pussy. Pussy is wonderful. It's great. Breastises are phenomenal. But at the end of the day, we have to operate on a higher level so that we can avoid a lot of these little silly situations and scenarios that we get caught up in. Because at the end of the day, Miss Cyn Santana, she's just another child with breasts. That's all she is. And I think that Joe Budden has figured it out. That's why they had their little falling out. And I mean, what do you really expect? Look at how she projects herself. Everything with this female is ass and breast, as it is with most of these females in this society. So now let's see what else it says here. She says, I just like black guys and Spanish girls, she explained, i.e., it's a fetish. She didn't say, I personally like so-called black men. She said, I like black guys with Spanish girls. So most likely she rolls with a clique of females who prefer to be with quote-unquote black American men. There are phenomena like that all across America, especially in many of these quote-unquote black and Hispanic communities, where you have people, especially Hispanic women, who prefer to be with so-called black men. And vice versa. You have certain black women who prefer to be with Hispanic men. It's whatever. The issue comes in when she claims that black men treat non-black women better than they treat black women. How would she know that? Maybe so-called black men treat each woman according to her conduct pertaining to his observation, his own personal observation. Every man is different, especially in how they're raised. Now, overall, there is what I would call a quote-unquote black American culture in this society that revolves around the veneration and the worship of the woman. And that's very deleterious to the so-called black man. That's what we have to address. But this notion that the so-called black man treats different races of women better than he treats the so-called black woman, that's nonsense. And we can see there are many examples of low-level so-called black men who impregnate non-black women and they leave them behind just like they do the so-called black women. In addition to that, we have examples of so-called black men who are upstanding, who impregnate black women, have children with them, and raise their children as they do with women of the other races. So it's very obvious to me that Miss Cyn Santana was trying to project her own personal fetish on black men, because many times it's not easy for a female to admit that she has a weakness for a man or a certain type of men due to what they're taught in this society about feminism and independence, so on and so forth. In addition to that, what she's really saying is that she believes that she's superior to the so-called black American woman. I just like black guys and Spanish girls, she explained. Y'all can keep the Puerto Rican men. I'm good. They're probably good also. I do black guys all day. Sorry. Now, brothers, did I not just state that for many other demographics or racial designations, when they're infatuated with the so-called black man or black woman, it's not just about that one man. It's about trying to see how many dicks they can accumulate or how many pieces of pussy they can accumulate. It's a fetish for them, like a crack addict. They want to see if your crack rock is better than the previous nigga's crack rock. That's all it's actually about. She says, I do black guys all day. Sorry, I did the Spanish thing. Doesn't work out for me. And you know what's so interesting? Just as an aside, people use that term Spanish as if it's a race. Spanish is not a race. And when it's pertaining to the people of the quote-unquote Western Hemisphere, from the region known as the Caribbean or Central America, those are not Spanish people. They speak Spanish. Now, some of them might be intermixed with some of the quote-unquote European Spaniards who came over from Europe. But many of them are not. Many of them are almost pure Aboriginal, but they'll still call themselves Spanish. I noticed that especially here in America, there's a conflation of the term Spanish with terms like Latino or Hispanic or what have you. And it just shows you that most people do not know who they really are. They have no idea what to call themselves. She says, I do black guys all day. Sorry, I did the Spanish thing. Doesn't work out for me. I think they're too emotional. Black guys cater to us Spanish girls especially. Like you know what? Let me not get into it. Black girls gonna take it personal. They're gonna be like, Anyway, I'm done with the poppies. So it's very obvious with the way in which this person, Cyn Santana, brought forth the statement or the allegation that she believes it. And I'm sure that she has enough data to prove what she believes to be a point. I just don't think that she understands how you're able to substantiate a claim like that. You actually would have to observe black men with black women and then observe that same black man with a Hispanic woman and see if his conduct changes and the conduct of the Hispanic and the black woman were the same. That's the only way that you could judge if there was a difference in how the so-called black man perceives the relationship. That's the only way. And if you have not done that, then you cannot make that assertion. In response to her comments resurfacing, Santana defended herself on Twitter. How would I know how a black woman gets treated in a relationship? Good question. That's the same question that I had. That's why you should not have made the comment. She said in a reply to one Twitter user, "Old ass interview, my young ass worded something poorly, and today in social media, everything gets taken completely out of context." No, it didn't get taken out of context because even you knew that what you were saying was controversial, which is why you cut yourself off midstream. I understand that. And you can attribute it to being young or what have you. At the end of the day, brothers, what you'll find, especially with people who have an interracial fetish, they'll claim that they're not going back to this or not going back to that. And after they engage themselves in a quote unquote interracial relationship that is traumatic or damaging, that's the first thing they do is try to run back to their own quote unquote race because they don't understand. It's not about the race that you dealt with. It's about the interaction between yourself and that person. And maybe it's just about you. Who the hell knows? Immediately after this, she quote tweeted someone telling her to stop explaining herself to strangers and started to apologize while attempting to provide more context. I especially love the black woman, she tweeted. She's trying to get back in the graces of the so-called black woman. That's part of the problem. If you're going to make a statement, if you believe it, stand by it. Don't kowtow to a certain demographic. Are you scared that a black woman's going to run up on you and try to hit you with a mollywop? Is that what that's about? I've never in my life bashed one. Never will. So yeah, I'm going to explain myself and shed some clarity on a clip that's being spread around with little context. Really, if she wanted to get back in the good graces of the so-called black woman, what she should have said was, I have no issues with the black woman because I am one. But that shows you that in her mind, there's a separation between the quote-unquote black American woman and the quote-unquote Dominican or Puerto Rican or Hispanic woman, quote-unquote. That's what's going on in her mind. So there's confusion all around because no one knows exactly what they are racially. Most people don't even know what the word race means. The word race means seed. She went on to also apologize for previously saying the N-word, tweeting, I've used the N-word ignorantly most of my life, not knowing that it was actually a bad word and it was offensive. Took that word out of my vocab. Now she's trying to go full woke because she's scared to death that the so-called black woman's going to come down on her like a damn hurricane. Check out some of her tweets in response to the situation below. No thanks. I've heard enough from Miss Cyn Santana. And I suspect that the reason why Joe Budden is thinking about cutting her off is because he's probably moving on to the next. Maybe he's tired of her bullshit. At the end of the day, they have a child together, so they're going to have to work out some type of arrangement. But just to get back to the point, the so-called black man, if you're paying very close attention, so-called black man, we have to stop allowing ourselves to be categorized and marginalized by people who view you as property. When someone says they think you treat them better than you treat someone else because of race, what they're saying is that they have a superiority complex over you and the women of your quote-unquote so-called race, even if you guys are of the same origin as Cyn Santana and Joe Budden are. So that means that the person has psychological issues that are going to manifest themselves in particularly traumatic situations where they're going to try to lord themselves over you and make you feel like you should just be thankful that they wanted to lay down with you in the first place. So anyway, peace.